welcome you all to this evidence session, which is actually entitled DWP Annual Report and Accounts and Universal Credit and DWP Statistics, which is a bit of a mouthful. Obviously, we haven't yet seen the accounts. I understand that those are going to be published tomorrow, but I also understand the Secretary of State that you've agreed to come back to address the committee on the wider aspects of the accounts on the 3rd of February. Can I ask you, first of all, to introduce yourself and your team for the record, please?
Yes, obviously I'm Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. Howard Shiplee, who's with me on my right, is the person who essentially is the Senior Reporting Officer on Universal Credit. Came in from, back in July when we last came, explained to you he's come from the private sector where one of his last jobs was to deliver the Olympic Park. He came in to do that, delivered it early and under budget. David Freud, Lord Freud, is the House of Lords Minister, but also Minister for Welfare Reform, and deals a lot with universal credit. And Mike Driver is the Finance Officer at the Department and has been involved in all of this issue around the universal credit finances, etc. And so I thought it would be useful to have him here as well.
Well, can I thank you very much for coming this afternoon. We have been trying to hold this session since I think September, initially on the statistics. The importance of the universal credit element of today's session has somehow grown in magnitude since the original intention. But if we don't mind, we'll start with the Department's use of statistics, and I intend to we've got questions that should last about half an hour, and then we'll move on to the issues around universal credit. The two are not disconnected in any way. But can I begin by asking what you say when the UK Statistics Authority Chair said that the government statistics should be used as a torch and not a crutch to enlighten the debate rather than to prop up a position that's already been agreed and adopted. Are you satisfied that your use of statistics is aimed at shedding light on DWP activities rather than just gaining support for policy reforms?
I am actually, and I think that this is borne out by the reality of the fact that we've published over the period that I've been there some over 500 statistical releases. We've also started the innovation of ad hoc statistical releases, which is actually we were congratulated for by UKSAA, and they said the Department for Work and Pension Statistics have established a page on the Department's website to provide links to additional statistical analysis, and the authority expects all other departments not currently to do so likewise. So our relationship with the UK authorities, I think, is pretty good. We try and publish as regularly as possible, and we try and stick to the strictures that are laid for the publication of that data. And we try to sell a positive message, and I know there have been issues around some negativity with regards to sickness and disability benefits, but to try and counter that, a few months ago we started a campaign called Disability Confident, a big conference in central London, brought a lot of the groups together, also a lot of employers, about trying to get them to understand what are the needs of disabled people in employment, to try and counter any kind of negative messages, and that's rolling out around the countryside at the moment, so that backs up some of the use of statistics. It's true that the UK Statistics Authority is actually very critical of your department's use of statistics, said that they've actually had more complaints about your department's use of statistics than any other department of government. But with respect, Chairman, I mean, I've had two letters. One was about something 2 years ago concerning something about the use of them on immigration, but they let that one sit. And then the last one was where we had a discussion around the use of where I referred to those going back into work on the back of the benefit cap. They said that whilst we couldn't prove that they had gone in, or couldn't prove that they hadn't, but I should therefore not make the link, other than that I believe to be the case, that those people are going back into work. Hugely to do with the fact that we're introducing the cap. That's my belief, but they've said that that should remain as a flat statistic, which we've accepted. But as I said, there were 500 releases, and although they get complaints, and they will get a lot of complaints now because people want to assume that we're saying some of the things that are reported and we're not saying those things, but the reality is, my understanding is that they are very satisfied with the way that we run that, and that we are doing this in the correct way.
I have some questions coming up about specific queries around statistics, but can I just push you a wee bit more on to what extent not just the things you say, your ministers say, but the things that actually come out of the department, or indeed some of your party colleagues say, which has gone into the press around the statistics or the misuse of statistics.
Can you specify colleagues, Chairman? Who
well, I was thinking of the chairman of the Conservative Party, who used the statistic that 900,000 people had given up their claims to disability benefits before, rather than go through the test, which I think the friend Mrs. Gilmore will show. I think was a completely false statistic, but it doesn't. Those kinds of comments to the press, and I appreciate you say that you don't control editorial policy, but there certainly have been comments to the press that have conflated statistics, have not put them into context, and has actually led to a great deal of fear and alarm amongst the very people you say that you're wanting to support, those people who have disabilities.
Can I just first of all say that was made clear at the time by the Statistics Authority, that what the Central Office did with these was exactly that, was conflate them, but under no assurance from us should they have done that. We didn't actually, and have never given them that idea of those figures, and we wouldn't have done so. That was something that they put together and released themselves. In fact, I wasn't even aware that they were going out with that comment at the time. So it's not in our interest for that, because that just raises an issue about statistics, and then we have to defend ourselves again. But as I say, these were not statistics that were published by us. They'd pulled two things together and conflated them, as you say, but it's not ours. And I have had conversations with him and with others about being careful to check with the department if they're going to say something about the statistics that are out there. They should check with us that those are the statistics that can be correctly used. And there has been an element of that since then, so there's been less of that going on.
Okay, I'll bring in Sheila Gilmore as something she pursued.
Thank you, Secretary of State. In April 2013, there were statistics published about DLA claimants, and you were quoted as saying, "We've seen a rise in claims in the run-up to PIP, and you know why? They know PIP has a health check. They want to get in early." And stories to that effect were then appeared in various newspapers. But in fact, 2/3 of those new claims are from children and pensioners who wouldn't be affected by PIP. And there was actually a fall in the number of claims made by working age claimants. So would you accept now that that description, which was your description, was misleading?
Yes, but it's taken out of context, because of course it was in a conversation about why some people may or may not have continued with their claims. I wasn't referring to absolutely everybody. I was referring to specific groups. There are other reasons as well. I've always been very clear about that. And the reality is that we've not had any uphill complaint on that particular issue to us from the Stats authorities. So if somebody wants to come and take it up with them, I'm happy to get that in full context. I don't have the exact context of the discussion, the interview, but I seem to recall that was done as part of a process of explaining why some people may not have gone ahead with their claim.
But would you accept that you achieved headlines at that stage which made it sound as if people were rushing to claim a benefit to get some advantage? That was the headline that was...
Well, I neither saw that headline, nor did I actually write any headlines. I'm not aware of any headlines on this, by the way, but you'll have to show it to me. I'm not completely aware of it. But my honest truth is that this was part of an interview and conversation, but it was in a wider context. So I have had no complaint about that before, to be fair.
Sort of further to that, ESA statistics are published and have been throughout about the number of people who are awarded the benefit both before and after appeals. And it's these statistics that are often used to make judgments about whether the benefit's working or not. In a letter dated the 2nd of November to myself from the then Disabilities Minister, it was stated that the before appeals statistics already took into account reconsideration, which is informal appeals, in fact. Does this not give a misleading impression of how many decisions are actually subsequently overturned?
Well, no, and I'm trying to remember the thing you refer to. I think, if I recall correctly, we then didn't publish data on appeals because we were out of sync with the Justice Department, whose responsibility it is for that appeals process.
Can I just stop you there, because I think that's a separate point which I might also want to ask you about. But the point was what is counted as a before and after appeal figure. And in the figures for before appeal, which are then contrasted with the figures of after appeal, reconsiderations are counted in the before appeal figure. If a reconsideration overturns the WCA, then it surely should be added to the number of decisions that are subsequently overturned.
Well, I'm satisfied with the way it's done at the moment. As I say, if you think that there's a better way to do it, then I'm very happy to look at that. If you think genuinely this doesn't help, I'm very happy to entertain that. But I've not seen any representations on that particular point come across my desk or been advised to me by our statisticians in the department. But if you're concerned about that, I'm always happy to look at it. But as I say, I haven't seen it so far.
Well, I certainly think one of your ministers is clearly aware of this, since I've had some correspondence about this. I'm disappointed that you're not aware of it. And are you aware that the statistics that are published for after appeals are only for new ESA claims and not for the migration? So again, it's a partial picture that is actually being given.
Well, my view is that we publish all the data that's relevant on all of the appeals, but the appeals issue is, of course, the job of the Justice Department, because they deal with all the appeals. We extrapolate from their own data. So all the data that exists on an appeals process is actually published through the Justice Department. So anyone wanting the full and complete level of data, it sits on the Justice Department's website when published. And the point I made earlier on, because I know you've raised this point before, we didn't publish some data on the appeals for the very simple reason that we got out of sync with the Justice Department. We'll be back in line with them next year, and we'll publish those figures together, but they are extrapolated from the Justice Department's own figures, and they do the work on those.
And those statistics that were missing from your October release, which I think are going to be available in January,
They will be.
The UK Statistics Authority did comment that your department could have drawn public attention to that and given the reasons for it.
Yes, I mean, maybe if there's a criticism at all, we should perhaps have said it, but it just was simply on the basis that we were actually publishing ahead of them, and we couldn't therefore refer to their data because it would have been wrong to have done so and would have received a rebuke from the UKSAA, the Stats Authority. So my sense on this, we did the right thing. Could we have drawn everyone's attention to it? Maybe. But the reality is that data is available eventually on the Justice Department's website, and I think it's quite important. We only extrapolate from that to put it on ours. They actually publish all of the data around appeals. So anybody who wants that could have gone to the Justice Department's website.
And would that
taken
include
that
the separate data for the migration cases?
This is my understanding, but I'll have to check back on that because I'm not responsible for their data.
Do you think it's appropriate that the DWP do publish that separately, since you publish some of the information?
Well, let me have a look at that. I'll go and have another look at that again. But as I say, it all comes off their database because they are the ones publishing this data. So we publish what we think is relevant to our area, but anybody who wants to get more data can, of course, go to the Justice Department's website and pick up anything they don't find on the DWP's website.
Debbie.
Just to clarify, Minister, in terms of the statement that that Sheila made before in connection with the remarks, was saying that there was, I think, the surge, I think the introduction of the new PIP abolition of, with the introduction of the new PIP and the abolition of the DLA had a closing down sale effect. That was actually in the Mail on Sunday, and it was by your Minister for Employment. And then you also made a similar statement in the Daily Mail. But most importantly, Minister, I'm just concerned that you're suggesting that the conflation of data is just is a matter of conflation at Conservative Party headquarters. Is that right?
No, well, the specific case that was being referred to was, in fact, nothing to do with the department. The Conservative Research Department, or whoever actually puts that stuff together, draws it from department data. We have made this point clear to and to all my colleagues, and we vice versa accept all of this. The reality is that what we publish is the data, and it's very clear, and there should be guidance in there as to what you should and shouldn't be able to use the data for. So we've obviously discussed this matter, and I've tried to get my colleagues at Central Office to make sure that they check first before they put any statements out about the area that DWP covers, because it's complex and can sometimes be misrepresented. So,
okay. So the 4 statements in 2 weeks, that was just an error and being interpreted.
Well, I don't know. That's something you'll need to speak to the chairman about. My general view on this one is if they've made mistakes on this, then those mistakes are mistakes that have been taken up with the UKSAA. But with regards to the department, we didn't get any discussion with them on this. This is something they chose to add to their own briefing data, so they have to carry the burden of that responsibility themselves.
This is just an issue then, as I say, interpretation of data and it's occurring.
Well, in there, because the data that was published was absolutely correct and accurate by us, and I actually had not referred to it in that way at all when I actually saw it.
Can I then move on, if that's all right? This is related, although it may not sound as though it is to start with. But a former JCP advisor with over 18 years' experience across Manchester job centres has told me that benefit claimants are being deliberately set up to fail in order to sanction quotas without regard to natural justice or their welfare, and that this is contrary to the Civil Service Code. He says he's tried to raise this issue with managers at all levels, including with Neil Cooling and even the whistleblower helpline, but each time has been rebuffed. He told me the ploys that are used include making appointments for claimants without telling them, so they are marked as no-shows, and it is times they don't attend within the 5 days grace period, and so that they're automatically sanctioned. Now, we know that 5% of JSA claimants are sanctioned every month, and this has escalated since the end of last year when the new sanction regime was brought in. But the informant believes that this is only the start, and this is distorting statistics. So this is something that we're hearing, that there is a distortion of statistics after they're published. What he's saying is there's distortion of statistics as data is being collected. So, first of all, were you aware of this?
Well, I'm not aware of that, and I have to say that I would like to see his evidence for that. And he's making, if he's making that, with respect, he's making an allegation about some of the incredible hard work that job advisors do.
And he was one of them.
Well, maybe he was, but you know, there's always one or two people that have a different view operating in an organisation. I happen to believe, unless it's shown to the contrary, that people who work in the job centres do so, do a very good job. They work very hard, and they apply sanctions within the rules. And I've spoken to Neil Cooling on this on a number of occasions. He's looked at almost all the allegations that come through, and at every occasion he said he cannot find a reason to doubt the fact that people are operating in exactly the right manner. Now, if there is an allegation that has a scintilla of truth in it, then we will investigate it, and if anybody has been found to be doing this... I have no problem with meeting any informant, but Neil Cooling is the man that should meet him first, and I'm very happy to talk to him.
And as I say, completely rebuffed at every stage of management, going against the Civil Service Code, in terms of the distortion, the deliberate distortion of data.
Okay, but we all, you know, with respect, this is a huge organisation. It employs tens of thousands of people around the country who every day go into their job.
To come forward, Minister.
But I don't see why anyone should be frightened to come forward, because nothing's going to happen to them if they come forward and tell us that there is an issue, if such an issue exists. But my point is that you're giving me one individual in an organisation of many tens of thousands of people around the country. When I visit all these organisations, what I observe most of the time is that they actually do an incredibly good job in very difficult circumstances. So yes, you know, if he's got an issue to raise, and if he thinks it's a problem both in the way that he was working, but maybe if it's endemic, then we want to know about it. But we investigate all of this, and Neil Cooling will do that, because it is his job to front up to all of that.
My final question, with the debacle of Universal Credit and this, do you really feel that you're in control of your department?
Yes, I do, and there's no debacle on Universal Credit, and this, you've given me one issue that you've raised.
One issue which is affecting
you've raised
millions of
one
people.
individual as a case, and you know, we had this with respect on the statistics, but I keep coming back to this. We've had 500 statistical releases, and there have only been 2 occasions when the Statistics Authority has had to correct what I or my ministers have actually been doing in 3 years. So with respect, I disagree on both counts.
There's another issue where statements have been given which appear to be statistical, they appear to be based on statistics and have been given very recently. And at both, I think, the last DWP questions and at the Select Committee when the Employment Minister was here only a few weeks ago, statements have been made saying that half of the young people who do work experience, this is between 18 and 25-year-olds, get jobs, Has there been any evaluation actually carried out since the very first pilot, which I think was about 1,300 people? Because I haven't seen anything published, and yet a statement is being made to that effect.
Well, I think the real point is that around half actually come off benefits, and then there's further work done about how many people stay in sustained work. I haven't actually got those figures in front of me, but
has an evaluation been carried out?
Yeah, we evaluate the whole time.
And is that going to be published?
Yeah, we'll be publishing full evaluations, rolling as we do on every single area and every programme. But the reality is that the work experience programme has been remarkably successful, far more successful than any of the other programmes of make-work schemes that were in existence under the previous government.
But when a general statement of that sort is made, would you not expect statistics to already be published and the evaluation to be published?
The figures are there available. I'm very happy to ensure that you get them.
The last press release that came out from the department on benefit sanctions had the headline, "Benefit Sanctions Ending the Something for Nothing Culture." That was the actual headline put on by the departmental press release. Is that not an example of how an erroneous view of people on benefit, somehow they do nothing for it, and it's unfair, that it's there's a public belief that people in receipt of benefits are not entitled to them or get too much? Is that not a problem when those kind of headlines?
Well, what I don't agree about is that, the fact is that if you have sanctions, they are imposed for a reason, and they're reasons to do with people's failure to comply with the strictures that they agreed to when they drew job seekers' allowance. Well, can I just finish on this one? Because, with respect, I've listened a lot to what is being said and moaning about this. I just want to answer this question of the chairman's. Let me just answer the chairman's. Maybe I can answer the chairman's. Mrs. Abrams, you've had a fair crack at this. Let me answer the chairman's question. And I actually think that those sanctions indicate, if somebody is sanctioned, my view is that advisors impose those sanctions as a last resort when they think that somebody is not complying with what they meant to do, maybe not doing enough to seek work, not turning up for appointments, not taking interviews, or even making an effort to find those jobs. And for the most part, they're there to say, we can't go on letting you just take the money and not do what you were meant to do. And I think that's really, in essence, a contract. So I think it's a fair statement to say that this is the case, that in fact that's what the sanctions are there to do. But I would also remind, Chairman, you and the committee, that under the last government, similar assumptions were made about the sanctions regime throughout. And it was in fact an ex-Labour cabinet minister who was the first to refer to shirkers versus workers. So with respect, I think it's a two-edged sword.
Do you consider that someone who on one occasion is 10 minutes late for an appointment should be sanctioned? And does it concern you that that sanction was then overturned on reconsideration?
No, I actually think that the advisors do their level best to implement a sanction as and when they think it is the last resort. I have sat on many occasions inside job centres watching and listening to them as they have to apply these sanctions. They don't do it easily, but what they do is they recognise somebody there is not cooperating. And I can just simply say that, when people accept a benefit like job seekers allowance, then in a sense it is a contract. They may not be in work, but they are in work to find work in a sense, because the taxpayer is paying them that money to support them, but they have expectations, and it's a conditional benefit. So, they need to understand.
One late
I'm not going to deal with one particular case, but what I am telling you is the vast majority of cases, I would think, that are opposed are correct and are done as a last resort. I have a huge amount of faith in job centre staff. I think they do a brilliant job up and down the country. They have done a huge amount to get difficult people back into work, to find work for those whose morale has been a bit lost because they've been out of work for a while. They put in huge hours, and I think genuinely we can always find one or two cases, but the reality is I think they do very well.
Okay, well, I think we're going to move on now onto the questions on universal credit. We obviously won't see the detail until we see the accounts published tomorrow, but you have written the committee a letter today, which seems to indicate that 40.1 million of universal credit software assets has been impaired in total. I think that means written off in layman's terms. Can I just ask, is that the final write-off for the existing IT, or is that just the write-off up to this point?
Well, of course, if anything goes wrong going further forward, that might be different. But can I just say, Mr. Chairman, in answer to that particular question, which is important, is that we've had to sit for some time while a lot of bogus nonsense has been talked about huge levels of additional write-offs. This note in front of you absolutely finishes that and ends it. The reality is what our estimate was earlier on when we first put into the NAO and this total figure are very close together. And this has been one of the most complex and detailed assessments that has taken place either in the private or the public sector. This is now signed off and tomorrow will be published. And the reason we put it on the table here is because it says something else in there which is even more important, is that the asset that we have now actually owned that will take universal credit forward is actually worth to the government £151 million. And I think it's quite important to recognise it's not just about the write-offs, it's that we own an asset which will deliver universal credit, something which has not been reported on. I wonder if I could just bring Mike Driver in, explain how that has been done, so that you can understand fully what this write-off is about.
That, can I just, because that wasn't quite my question. My question was, is that the final write-off of the asset? Now, we've got detailed questions about the rollout and to the different groups, but my understanding is that there is a new IT system that's been developed. So what is the position with this old IT? Yes, it's not been written off now because it will be used...
It's not old IT, it's the IT that we were developing to roll out UC, and it will go in and roll out UC through that. But perhaps I can explain, Mike Driver, to explain the details of how that one works.
I'll answer your question, Mr. Chair. So you're absolutely right. Our accounts will be laid in Parliament tomorrow, but importantly, Amias Morse, the CNAG, has certified those accounts. And he's given us, in terms of universal credit, a clean audit opinion. So what we have is an intangible asset of £152 million. That's £125 million of software code and £27 million of licences. And if I could just break that code down for a moment, we've done a very detailed review and with the Government Digital Service as well as our own IT colleagues within the department. And that has shown that £34 million of that code will be fully used in any ongoing digital solution. That leaves £91 million of software codes that will be used in the solution that we have until digital is implemented. So
that does mean that once the new digital...
If I could come back to that, there is a bit of a story to this. So what that means is that, as I say, we've got an asset of £152 million and we've impaired £40.1 million. If you cast your mind back to the Public Accounts Committee, we said at that time that we had an impairment of 34.4. We might impair more. We have a further £5.7 million. As I say, importantly, I think the NAO has given us a clean audit opinion regarding the carrying value of our assets. I think that the point that you make about the future is that we have recognised that as we move forward and we implement the new digital solution, the assets that we have in place will be amortised or devalued in a shorter period than we originally anticipated.
So it'll be written off year on year.
Well, it will be amortised. That's the term. So it will have less, but we will write it down over a 5-year period as opposed to a longer period. Now, I would argue, in actual fact, that the way in which we had set our accounting policies previously to write down software code over a 15-year period was almost certainly too long. And one of the things that we're discussing with the NAO separately is the way in which we apply accounting policies towards software code as we go forward. But I think that the important thing that I would want to stress to you is that not only have we done an impairment review to determine whether or not we've got value greater than the carrying value of our assets, we've also done a value in use calculation. So we've looked at the asset that we have got and we've used the Treasury Green Book methodology to determine what net present value, what value to the taxpayer we will obtain from using that asset. And it says it is substantially more than the value of that asset, even taking into account the write-off that you described and any further investment that we might have to make into that asset as we move to other elements of universal credit.
As we're going to be talking about the digital solution as opposed to the present IT, I wonder if one of you four gentlemen can explain to me the difference with the existing IT that's been developed to date and is what is being presently rolled out very slowly, and the digital solution.
Okay, can I bring, this is a good
and I want it in terms that a layman can understand, please.
Can I bring a layman in to talk about it? Howard?
When it comes to IT, I am a layman, so I can perhaps help. But we have a lot of IT experts as well. So if we just look at what we've got, what we've been building is what I would call a conventional system. So it's got a lot of heavy hardware, a lot of hard drives, just as your home computer does, and it's got big memory banks, all of which you have to procure. You either have to rent them or you have to get licenses to use them. So that is a conventional system. It's been developed on what is called a waterfall approach, and I think that's quite important too, because when we compare it with digital, waterfall is about establishing what it is you want to do at the very beginning, writing out a lot of very detailed specifications.
But of course you didn't start with waterfall, you started with agile.
You know, I've just come, if I may. I think where we were was actually with a little of both, to be frank. I think there was some waterfall and some agile being used. What we've now got to is a situation where we've, as I said some time ago, that there is considerable utility in what has been developed. We're developing that further now by using a more traditional approach in terms of developing that software, and we're going to expand that, as you know, into the first one to couples and then into children. When you look at the digital approach, that is very different. First of all, the digital approach relies not on large amounts of what is commonly known as tin in computer circles. That is
known as
tin boxes.
Yeah.
Black
You
boxes.
design the boxes, you build them.
Black boxes, for want of a better word. But what you do is use what is called open source. So you go onto the web and you use mechanisms on the web which allow you to store and access data in that environment. The advantage of that over time is that is much cheaper to operate, it's cheaper to build, and it's cheaper because you don't have to pay large license fees for it. So that's one of the important issues. The other issue...
Can I just ask, why didn't you do that right from the start?
I think one of the issues here is that you've got to bear in mind that technology is moving very rapidly. So my personal view, exactly, that 2 to 2.5 years ago, such things were not necessarily available in the way they are today.
Not certainly. It was 2.5 years ago, but the Secretary of State told this committee that the system that had been set in place then was working. Well, it clearly wasn't, because it had to be changed so often. So what is actually working now?
The system that it was being built then, and the system that was deployed in Pathfinder, is working. I was in Hammersmith last week, sitting with one of our agents, watching her using the computer. The system works.
Why then are paper and pencil still being used?
I didn't see any paper and pencil on the table at all.
But the functionality that was originally promised under universal credit, the ability for claimants to manage their own accounts, to report change of circumstances, none of that is working in the present system at all.
That is correct.
And it probably never will work in the present system.
And in my view, it would be inappropriate to use it. I think one of the issues in the early days was that there was within UC a mantra of digital by default, which said that everything should be digital. Now, I think when I was here last time, you asked about this, and I explained from a security point of view, to have everything digital is not at this stage of development a sensible or appropriate solution. It will take some considerable time to get to a totally online system. In fact, nobody is operating the types of system that we're talking about, which are effectively dispersing large sums of money. No one is using a totally online approach. You have to prove who you are. You have to prove what you're doing when you change circumstance. If you want to open a new bank account, you have to go and present yourself. That is, and I've talked to a lot of financial institutions about these things, and that is exactly where they're coming from as well.
So there was sorry, Glenda. I'll bring you in just a second. So when it was promised that all of this digital by default was going to happen, actually that was a false promise. That was never going to be delivered.
I think, it's very difficult to talk about promises. There's nothing wrong in having aspirations. If people don't have aspirations to achieve things, then there will be no progress. Now, perhaps that was an aspiration a little too far at a stage in time.
And will it be possible, and in what timescale will it be possible under the new digital solution?
One of the issues that's very important to me is actually that we don't do exactly what you're trying to get me to do, which is force a pace that is unrealistic. So the first thing from a digital development point of view, and we might want to come back down to explain a little more about how that works. The first thing is to make sure that it isn't put under excessive pressure. That's why we're using we're building on Pathfinder, we're building on the existing IT, which I said some time ago had substantial utility, and thus it has proved to be, so that we can roll out the system, we can start taking on more complex claimants, we can expand it geographically, and we can expand in numbers, all of which is about learning, both for our agents to learn, and of course for us to learn more about how claimants behave.
We've got questions in detail on that, but I'm going to bring Glenda in first and then Kwasi.
Simply on the issue of digital by default, when did the Secretary of State accept your assessment? Because up until the point of change, which
I think I can answer
I'll
this.
finish the question if I may.
I can answer this.
But on the issue that you've raised, up until, well, quite recently, the Secretary of State had lauded digital by default, not only for the system delivering the benefit, but also as a way of teaching people who had no computer skills to become computer literate. And that has been the mantra right up until now. So when did he actually accept your information that the existing system wasn't going to work and it had to change?
That isn't what he has recommended to me.
But
and
the
can I
question
just
is
explain
directed
to you?
to Mr. Shipley.
Well, he can answer this question, but I need to answer when.
No, I'd like
you
his
asked a question
answer
about
first.
when did I know. The answer is, the reason I put the Red Team report in back in 2011-12 was because I had concerns that they were attempting to do too much on the digital front. However, notwithstanding that, and don't confuse this because you're, again, conflating something here. The fact is that we have a system which is online. It will be rolled out online. They will access it online, and it will do the things that you're talking about, which is to help people who then seek work to find jobs where they have some kind of computer requirement, because they will come into this system online and make their application online, and then further changes in due course will come through development. So the point is, back in 2011-12, this is the reason why I said I feel that this needs to stop and pause when I put the Red Team in, and they said this is being overly ambitious in its attempt to be completely digital by default. There need to be some changes because the security aspects of this would not work in line with what they were trying to do. And that is when first of all, Philip Langsdale and then Howard's come in to look at this, and then Howard can explain to you now how his recommendations were driven. But the system, the equipment that we're talking about is equipment that works. The question is, how far do you allow people to access it online? That is the question. And Howard, I think we want to...
Well, just before you answer me, Mr. Shiplee, could I just point out to the Secretary of State that in September of this year you informed the House that you had taken over almost exclusive control of this system, that you were bringing it in on time and on budget, and it was still digital by default. We are now 3 months away from September. Apparently the whole system has changed, and now Mr. Shipley is telling us that digital by default isn't going to deliver.
Changed. The point that I was making was, within the timescales and within budget, we are delivering a universal credit solution, and that is exactly what Howard Shiplee has proposed. And we could not do it if the equipment that we were building was not capable and working. The point was made, you might have missed it, we had an asset of £152 million. That asset is the very equipment that actually works, and that is what he is building this system on. Do you want to say a few words?
No, Secretary of State, it's not what we missed, it's apparently what you missed. You told us in September that the system was working. We are now told that it isn't working, and the number of people who are going to go through the Pathfinders is minimal.
No.
Perhaps you'd like to answer
You're conflating so many issues
if you can remember it.
becoming visible.
I think I can.
Far away.
I think I can. The first thing is that digital by default, as far as I'm concerned, and my direction that I was given went away a long, long time ago, as the Secretary of State has mentioned. I think from the Red Team reviews. I'm sorry, but that's my understanding.
Yes,
very clearly. The second issue is it is working. There's this constant suggestion it's not working. The system works.
Yes.
Now, it works for a limited population at this time. It has got the capability.
The easiest one.
Yes, indeed. Well, with the greatest respect, would you start with the most difficult in pathfinding? I don't think so.
Why? We've constantly warned about those being the most difficult cases.
Well, I think that's a very different point. I think, indeed, that the very fact that we're saying, let us learn and move forward and not disturb the most difficult cases until further down the process, is a much more sensible approach to take.
But it's come a long time. It's taken a long time to come, hasn't it?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm going to interrupt now because we do have detailed questions on the rollout and the detailed cases. But Kwasi first, and then Nigel, who has those questions.
Question about sort of timing. I mean, to me, it's clear that something can work, but take time rolling it out more fully, which seems to be your position. But I wanted to ask a question on this. I mean, at what time frame are you looking at in terms of, will you be able to present your revised business case for the IT to the Treasury? Would you get approval for any new IT? What time frame are you looking at to get the thing done, as it were?
Okay, we intend to place a business case before the Treasury in the early new year. That is our intention to do. In terms of what we're currently doing, as I was explaining earlier, we are starting to roll out. We will start to roll out in the new year. First of all, some improvements to Pathfinder. We know there are some issues which can be improved. We want to implement those. We've already got approval from the Ministerial Oversight Group to implement those. We will then move immediately to start work on couples to develop and finalise a set of software which is already highly developed and in fact was in test at the time everything was stopped at the earlier part of this year. So we could almost take this off the shelf. We do some more testing and we will then implement that in the early part of summer, and then later towards the autumn we'll then have been working on children, which means we can take in families. Now what we want to do to lead through to your total question is to assess how well that goes in terms of our conventional system, and then we will assess what the next steps are in terms of where we go next, and the next steps are likely to be in volume terms as we start building up volume to better test the system. And I think it's right to say in parallel with that we are also working on the digital solution, which you might want to come back to. Sure.
Indeed. Nigel's got some questions on the more complex bits.
I think you're moving seamlessly into this set of questions. Can you just run us through that comment about the software was nearly written for couples? I kind of assumed it would be the same software as for single individuals and you just unlock a few more boxes on it. It sounds like it's a completely different piece of code.
I think that the issues here that it's exactly the point that was made before. As the potential for claimants to change circumstances, for things to change, the more that occurs, the more complicated it becomes. And therefore, the next stage is to work on couples. That will be a complicated issue. Couples come together, they divide, they then have children, things happen. These things, this sort of software isn't something that gets done on the back of a cigarette packet. It's complicated work in writing a lot of code. It's also interpreting many hundreds of pages of policy detail. That is what happens in certain circumstances. So this is by no means a 5-minute exercise. It is fortunate that that piece of work had reached the level of maturity. Now it's right to say that the level of maturity of similar work for children was not that far advanced, and it will take longer for us to prepare that.
I wonder if I could just bring Lord Freud in, because it's something he was working on originally.
I just want to make the point, there's a lot of jargon around using this word digital by default. We have actually got we are building a digital system, we are building a system where people interrelate with it initially on computers and will continue to do so. In practice, we're building the second generation system for smartphones, because the use of that technology is taking off at extraordinary speed. Indeed, even on the Pathfinder technology, we're finding a lot of people interacting with it on handheld devices, including phones. So when people say, oh, it's not digital by default, that's a very minor issue, that there are some things we can't afford to do digitally because of security reasons. As Howard said, that is something that we are doing in common with banking services, for instance, which would always test, have you got someone at the other end, or have you got someone trying to defraud the system?
I'm sure we'll come back to that, but Mr. Shiplee, can we just pursue that stuff about couples you were on about? Because my understanding was that the individual's relatively simple situation currently in universal credit, once they're in, I think the awful phrase lobster potting was used or something.
Well, couples are also in at the moment. There may be some confusion about this. There will be individuals that have come in form of couples, they stay in universal credit. So already they're being dealt with within universal credit and other changes as well. So it's not as though we can't deal with couples, they can. But what Howard is talking about on this is that for the expansion through the volumes, the developing of what was pretty nearly completely developed about couples is finalising that and then rolling that out so you can actually start bringing couples in as couples rather than because they became couples when they were originally single.
Sorry, can I...
Sheila, hold on. No, hold on. I think because Nigel, I suspect, is about to ask that question.
Yeah, because I was just trying to equate the last two answers on that. It sounds like the software for couples wasn't yet fully tested, and yet the current system's actually able to cope with couple situations.
There's a very limited number of couples, and therefore we're dealing with that manually at the moment.
So it's been done manually, not...
And then for the volumes, you need to make the IT.
But you haven't had to bounce anybody out of universal credit because they got too complicated. And do you know roughly how many of those 2,000 people who've claimed formed couples?
I don't have any figures.
We do have some figures, but we're not releasing those figures at this stage. But we do have examples of people who've gone through health and disability issues, have had children and childcare issues. We've had some moving to partners, caring. We've gone through all of those in relatively small numbers, but we've been able to track through how it works in terms of universal credit. And just to take an example of one of the more complicated cases we've had, we had a claimant who met a partner who had a son who wanted to move in together, and they had therefore needed to move house, and had his own son moving in with them over the weekends. So the new partner was in receipt of income support. So what we got out of that rather complicated example was a partner claim, a child, a termination of tax credit, a termination of income support, and a change of address. And we were able to work that through in policy terms on a manual basis to find out how all those systems actually work in live. And it's vital that we do that by example, because then when you build up the IT, you've seen how it works in practice with a small number before you go into...
And the IT is, as you know, automation. That's what we're dealing with here, so that you take what would otherwise be manual and it becomes automatic through the system which Howard is talking about. There's no mystery to that. So the lessons learning how they interrelate actually hugely helps with the final finishing off of those elements of IT that take the next couple.
Or what happens? Is that paid as part of the universal credit?
I mean, there's actually a misapprehension which actually notices some people. Housing costs are incorporated in the Pathfinder. You know, the only element that is not, that we would not let people in on, is if you have a mortgage. But if you have rental costs, those people are in on the Pathfinder.
Unless they're in temporary accommodation.
Not in temporary accommodation, absolutely right. Although we have now got people in temporary accommodation.
Can I just clarify what you mean when you use the word manual? You said that you've worked through these in policy terms manually.
Yeah.
In other words, it's not been done by the computer. The final payment might be done by a computer, but actually all the working out isn't done by a computer.
Well, we have elements that we work out in terms of, we can read the RTI feed, but we just make sure when we run it that it's being done correctly through the computer.
And this is really the point that Howard Shiplee is talking about, is the next phase that couples is to get the automation on couples out, and then as we're doing that, then the further developments for automation of couples with children, and then you start to look at bringing in the tax credit elements as well, and that process is what the plan that we've laid in front of the House actually does, testing at each stage that what we actually set out to get is evaluated so that it does deliver that, and then you move on to the next phase before you roll that out. So each one is tested in turn. That's the new
I
process.
think this is why the accounting is important here, because what we have said is that we have got an asset that works. It's working in a live environment. What we are talking about, though, and I think it's important to get this across, is that we are talking about a pathfinder. It was actually designed to flush out these issues. So the process that Howard is taking forward is to test and then to learn and then to implement and continue through that cycle. And if we need to update our software as a result to add to that, we will fix that, which is a normal way of doing IT business.
Forgive me for a minute, Chair. You're absolutely right. But
Hold on. I think we've all interrupted Nigel, and I'm going to get a bit of discipline on everybody. Nigel, can you carry on? And then I'm going for Angela, and then I'm coming back to you. So hold your question. Sorry, Nigel. Yes, sorry, I apologise.
I think I've got all that now. So when you're talking next summer about bringing couples in, will that be in a big bang to all the pathfinders, and you start with one and slowly pick them off around the country?
No, we're not. The big issue with all of this is safe and secure. It's been said many times. So we'll start progressively and move through the various locations of Pathfinder, setting the pace on the basis of a safe and secure way to go forward. If things are going well, then we can speed the pace up. If we're hitting some hiccups, then we can just slow the pace down. There's no question of any big bang approaches.
And when you say move to more of the northwest of England, what does that mean in that context?
It means ultimately we would go to a region. We have about 90 offices in the northwest. That would provide a basis for rolling out to a larger number of offices. That would massively increase the number of claimants being dealt with, and it's also starting to test the system at substantial scale.
And are you visiting that when you've got happy with couples and happy with children?
Yes.
Then you'll go to the whole region.
Yes.
That's the phase.
And then you look to bring in, providing that works, the tax credit stuff into the northwest. So you actually set up a sub-country, as it were, in the northwest, so that they eventually become universal credit.
There's one more element that we need to test very carefully, which is what we're calling the JSA tail, the people that we've excluded because they're quite complicated, in many cases vulnerable people, and so we need to make absolutely sure that we have carefully gone through each of those types in small scale before we go into a region.
So when do you think you'll have the region?
Well, we've got some dates. Howard, do you want to?
Our intention, subject to the safe and secure step-by-step approach, would be towards the autumn and the early part of 2015.
Okay, so
but that is absolutely dependent on the progress we make during next year.
So that was the autumn of 2015?
No, 14.
So a year's time.
A year's time.
And then, if you remember right, just to clear this up, if that then, we believe that's working well, then we start that process of then other regions now moving out so that we complete the process on a regional basis.
So that's quite an acceleration, isn't it, from starting this year with individuals and taking till next summer to get couples to then be children and the whole region by the end of next year?
Well, I don't think so. And after all, we're also building a system. There's one thing is rollout, another is building the system.
How many people do you think will be on UC by the time we get to that first region coming on in a year?
I just, at the moment, I'm not prepared to give any numbers at the moment. I think we've got to go step by step in the way we've said. Our statisticians will establish what the numbers are, and I think as we go forward we'll be able to explain in more detail what that's going to look like.
But you must kind of have a view, surely, by the time you've got couples and children on in a year's time.
The furthest I would go is that it will be into tens of thousands, and I think importantly it will start, because of the volumes, it will start to give us a greater level of accuracy on the statistics that are being produced, which I think is quite important, coming back to a previous question.
And just one last question from me. I suppose, I mean, the statement last week suggested a bit of slippage on the full implementation date, but for full implementation, but for those very difficult few 100,000, are we still thinking your own words last time, the opening ceremony still 2017?
Yes, I think that is the case. You've already mentioned that we've already said that certain groups will flow past that date, and that is sensible, but the intention is that the system will be closed to new claimants. New claimants will be, the old systems will be closed by that time.
Well, by 2016, actually, the universal credit, as it were, on that plan, it says tested and evaluated, but universal credit as an entity and the other benefits shut down by 2016. The group that you're talking about is really the support and RAG groups of ESA. That is the recommendation that he made, because they're going through quite a lot of change at the moment anyway, and the reality is that they have the least amount of work requirement placed on them. There's no conditionality in that group, and the view was that they're going to take a little longer to get used to this process, and so frankly the others are all work related, but this group is less so, and likely therefore to have to handle with some care. But ESA, as it were, as a benefit, will have closed down, and new entrants will be on universal credit as they come in, not those that have been there for a while, and some of those have been on for a long time, as you know.
And what's your kind of assessment of the likelihood of hitting that as your opening ceremony date? I mean, is that a best case of the range, or is that mid case now?
I think it's what we believe is the practical point of the range.
So it's not kind of like the most optimistic scenario. That's a realistic.
No. I think it is realistic.
We are solo.
Yeah, hold on to that and thought, because I'm going. Nigel, you finished?
I finished it.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to Dame Angela, and then I'm going to go to Debbie, and then I'm coming back to Stephen because it then fits in with his questions. And I'll bring you back in, Sheila, if it hasn't been answered. Dame Angela.
This is clearly an extremely complex and ambitious process, and as it rolls forward, it will capture more and more groups of claimants. As it moves towards completion, you will be then having the most challenging cases to deal with, people with constantly changing circumstances and so on, which will probably be its biggest challenge. Can you estimate a figure as a percentage of the whole of the body of claimants of those who are extremely complex?
Well, I mean, we are embarking on what is almost a parallel UC exercise in the local support service framework currently, with local authorities and housing associations and other key, particularly third sector groups, exactly to start flushing that kind of thing out, because what we need to do is, what we are doing is creating a series of partnerships in the various local areas to make sure that the vulnerable people are supported in the way that they need to be. And that is going to be a major exercise. We are embarking on a series of trials of the local support service framework, and we are combining that with a major testing process for UC itself, so that those two will come together. But this is a lot of work going into that particular area for that particular reason.
Are you funding Glenda, please. I'm trying to exercise. No, Glenda. No, just wait. Dame Angela, you're finished. I'm going to Debbie next.
I'm next. Can you confirm, Secretary of State, that again, based on the what Sheila was saying before, that the economic and fiscal output report indicates that you won't be able to deliver the full quota of claimants that was indicated on time. In fact, I think it indicates that 700,000 claimants are not projected to join the programme by the end of 2017.
Just reiterate what we were saying earlier on, which is the group that you're referring to, and this may shrink as a group because there is a natural change in circumstances, particularly from the work-related activity group, which is part of ESA. But there has been a decision made. In fact, this was a recommendation that Howard and his team made to me, that this is a group that, if you wanted, you could accelerate them in, but that would be too difficult because they are a complex group. And in fact, the committee itself has made... Well, they will be on the benefit that they are on at the moment. And the key thing is, it is this committee that has made these recommendations. In fact, I think Abrams, you actually made that recommendation to us that we should be very careful to ensure that those vulnerable people are dealt with not against any artificial timescales. I don't think I have a quote from you on that, but I think only fair to say that due recognition is being given of that.
It's the reason why the delay, Minister. It's not, it's not a question that you're considering and now at this late stage, this vulnerable group. It's now because of the delays with the actual programme, and I think we need to be very honest about that.
Let's be very honest about it. This is a very vulnerable group, and I think, as I said, they need careful attention, and I wouldn't want to rush them through, and we would want to look carefully at how we do it, because this is a group, particularly the support group, that is going to have no work expectation placed on them at all. Some of them are obviously very sick people. Some of them been on this benefit for a long time and will not be expected at any stage to change their circumstances. Highly unlikely. I think it's only fair to say that this is a group that's going to take a little while to get through into this programme. But ESA will exist. Those claimants who would otherwise be claiming ESA will not be claiming ESA. They will be claiming universal credit. So there will be people who would have been IB to ESA will now be on universal credit long before that point, because they will be coming on sometime around about 2016.
Can I just be clear, because people who are already on UC, because of the way the lobster pot works,
yes,
could turn out to be ESA claimants. They won't pop out of UC. Once they're in definitely, even though they might.
That's right. Which will include some of this group, which is why we don't know what that exact final number may be, because some of that may be swept up in households that actually include people like that as well. So my point is that this is a recommendation quite rightly made. I have no objection to that at all. I think it's reasonable to say that of all the groups, this is the one that most of all probably needs serious great care and attention when we're doing it, because universal credit is aimed at getting people back to work and to get that whole process of back to work established and in work support and reward. This is the group that is not going to be conditioned by that at all. So, they are the group that will be slowest to come in.
One of the things that we've learned from the two major sets of trials that we've done.
Can I just there is a division in the Lords. So Lord Freud, I understand you have to leave mid-flow. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if you don't go now, you might miss it. So if you hold your thought, you can tell us when you come back.
You'll be lucky to get there, I think.
Literacy by Bell. Can you? Yes, sorry, Teresa. Yes, very quickly.
Can I just ask a question on the 700,000 that may not go into universal credit, the most complex, most vulnerable?
The plan is that they will, but they'll take longer.
How will they get their housing benefit?
They'll deliver their housing benefit separately for them on the basis of that
so
being
local
outside
authorities
universal
will have
credit.
to maintain a housing
but there is a
benefit.
budget for that, but it depends on how
local
fast we bring them in.
authorities, instead of winding down their housing benefit sections, which is what they're planning to do, will have to keep a small housing benefit section to pay the housing benefit of the people.
We will support that for the process of the time that it takes to move them.
You will fund that?
We will support that, yeah. That's planned. We already have a budget allocation for that.
Okay, because local authorities are very worried about the slippage.
They are, and we're in discussion with them right now on the basis of the plan, so they've been fully discussed with them.
Okay. Stephen has been waiting patiently.
I appreciate, Secretary of State, yourself and Lord Freud and others, Mr Driver and Mr Shiplee, have been talking about doing things step by step. Secretary of State, would you share my slight exasperation that if memory serves me right, we were talking about or recommending more of a step-by-step thing a couple of years ago or even 2.5 years ago, and at the time I think it's fair to say that the department didn't feel it was necessary to take that on board. So would you appreciate that actually, certainly myself, the chair, and the then members of the select committee were actually advising or cautioning going at it sort of too fast?
Yes, and the truth is that 2011, the more I looked at it, the more I was concerned that we probably needed to be much closer to that approach, which is why I put the Red Team report in, because I was concerned about the nature of the trade-off between security and the online ask. And that is why we then took the decision once I had that report. So, I stepped in to do that for that very same reason, that I was concerned about that nature of the rollout. And since then, the rollout that Philip Langsdale was talking about before he sadly died, and how it has now come on, is along those lines to say, we introduced the Pathfinder back in 2012. It wasn't in the original system. That came off the back of the red team report, which was we needed to do more testing on the way in. So the Pathfinder was introduced in 2012 on the back of my decision to reset. And then the rest, of course, now you're hearing about is the plan to take that constant testing, evaluation, and then implementation forward through the expansion of the Pathfinder and eventually the full rollout of universal credit.
Good. Mr. Shiplee, prior to this, you had a very important delivery role at the Olympic, Great Britain Olympics, which was an enormous success, but must have been extremely complicated. How are you enjoying yourself at the DWP?
Well, I'm enjoying this afternoon, if that answers the question. So thank you for your concern. I'm sure that's true. The answer is this is very challenging. For me, on a personal basis, this is an area that is very new to me. The one thing that I think I might have mentioned it when I was here last time when I was asked to do this. One of the things I was very conscious of was the work that we did on the Olympic programme in the socio-economic areas to get people into work, to help people into work. And I just think, for me, this is a sort of an extension of that, but on a much greater scale. And it was very challenging on a small scale. It's very challenging on a scale of this size as well. I mean, after all, when was there last such a fundamental change in the welfare programme in this country?
My mother used to use a phrase that too many cooks, and one of the stories that the media has been reporting a fair amount is that even someone with your considerable project management experience sometimes has been getting a bit exasperated when perhaps other government departments have been interfering and trying to do things. I mean, how do you cope with that, and how much of a barrier has that been in delivering? And I share the Secretary of State's view on the importance of this, and I really think it still can be a game changer if it works. But is there any truth in the fact that there's even been to a stage where in the not too distant future you yourself have said, if the Cabinet Office or possibly another don't stop interfering, I'm off?
I can't comment on sort of tittle-tattle that I haven't heard. But what I can comment on is that occasionally one has disagreements with people and one has to get on with things. I'm charged with having a sense of urgency about these things. I make no excuse for that. But there's no other issues that are holding me up. Indeed, I was talking to Cabinet Office colleagues only a week ago about assisting us to move some issues forward, and Treasury have equally been extremely helpful in helping to move things along quickly and expeditiously. If that helps.
Thank you for that. You obviously share the view of the Secretary of State and many others of the importance of this. I'm absolutely certain that you would have had the baptism of fire in learning the complexity of the DWP and the whole benefits area. So slightly tongue-in-cheek was my question, but there was a serious intent underneath it. How sure are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Because you're the delivery guy. The Secretary of State heads on the block but doesn't work. But so is yours, as someone who's a very, very experienced delivery individual. How confident are you on out of a scale of 1 to 10 that universal credit will be delivered and delivered in scale, even if it's step by step, which actually I always supported, so I don't have too much of a problem that you've got step by step because it's such a complex area. Out of a scale of 1 to 10, Mr. Shiplee, how confident are you that universal credit will be delivered on scale to the huge volume that the Secretary of State has always said it would and has wanted it to be?
I've never been very keen on 1 to 10s, so I'll just give it to you straight. I believe that universal credit can be delivered in the way that's been suggested. What we're talking about is automating a system. We're talking about automating a system in terms of technology, but what is in many ways much more important is the cultural change, the change in the way our business operates, all of these things which tend to get completely ignored in these sorts of discussions. The technology is the enabler that will enable the systems to work in a more effective way. But the real, in my view, many of the challenges we have not fully faced yet. We will face them as the business is reconfigured, as tens of thousands of our staff are retrained. We've already retraining people now. 25,000 people, I think, are being trained at the moment in terms of claimant commitment alone. So I think that there's a whole series of challenges, but can it be delivered? The answer is there's no doubt in my mind.
And will it be delivered?
Say again?
And will it be delivered?
I believe it will be. I think it has to be delivered.
On because for it to work, and the key underpinning philosophy behind it, which I've supported from the very beginning, is to make work pay.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Now, on that basis, for that to succeed, you and I know, and I was in business for many years before I went into politics, that for this to actually succeed, it needs scale. It needs the very scale that the Secretary of State has been talking about ever since the beginning. It needs to be those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and millions of people. Are you confident that that will happen? And over a period of even slightly extended timetable, that as your considerable project manager experience, you're confident that that will happen?
The answer to your question remains the same. I believe it can be delivered, and I believe it has to be delivered. And I believe it has to be delivered. It's as you've said, you're rightly saying, it's very challenging, it's very difficult. Well, no one is arguing with that. But I think the answer is that the department considers itself up to the challenge, and we're going to make it work.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I have one more specific, but I know Quay's trying to get in.
No, he's got the next set question, so you do that. Right, okay, ask about numbers, and then you do the question, and then I'm going to Quay, because he's got the next set.
I mean, if we appear somewhat sceptical about promises that it'll all be fine, well, if some of us are sceptical, if you're not sceptical, it's because of the way these numbers have moved all the time.
Absolutely.
And at the moment, the OBR report is suggesting that the caseload in 2015-16 will only be 400,000. And then it's predicting a big jump up in the following year. Now, at each occasion when we've had universal credit on our agenda, these numbers have slipped very significantly. It's not just the people off the back end, post-2017. It was 4.5 million in March were expected to be in universal credit by 2015-16. The OBR report is now suggesting it's only 400,000. Is that not really a very substantial slippage?
Well, my view about this, and I think Lord Freud wants to come in, I'll let him in a second, and maybe you might want to come in on this one. First of all, as I said, and I've said before, the way we're doing it is different in the sense that one of the big concerns that I originally had, which is what I was making earlier on about the way it was being planned, was that we were doing a lot more front-end loading of numbers so that we were rolling out to large numbers much earlier on in the original plan. Now, one of the things that alarmed me at the time was this kind of deja vu about the tax credit problem, which was they did pretty much that. They did large numbers very early on, and then the system
so
didn't
why
cope.
in March of this year?
Can I just finish?
In the Secretary of State, you've talked about what you did 2 years ago before.
Can I just answer it, and then you can, if you
want...
Well,
it's a very specific question about the difference between March and now.
I'm trying to explain the reason why. And that is why, when we went for the reset, part of the reason for that was to do it in a different way, which is what Philip Langsdale and now Howard has been recommending, which is we have the system set up, we bring in enough volume to test, volume and all the complexity, so that we understand how the system operates and works, and then you start putting the larger numbers through towards the latter stages, because you understand how the system will work under stress with those numbers. And back, as we said at the time, when I reset, we were waiting for that final deliberation to take place, which is what I brought Howard Shiplee in for, to do and complete, which is why we have only just put out the note about how we will roll this out. That was the reason why.
So that's since March, that's because of the
this
reset.
report has been,
I mean, effectively, you can't...
It does put a lot into 2016-17.
But effectively, you can't do new numbers until you have new numbers. So basically, we're looking at an old set of numbers until we could revise them by definition. But I think one of the things that we have tested well in the organisation is how do you start a big programme when we've got more than 50 change programmes going on? How do you get them to work? And you do that by going very carefully slow, small numbers, test the system Then you do your volume, as the Secretary of State have said. And we have learned that lesson, whether it's the benefit cap, whether it's child maintenance,
PIP,
introduction of PIP.
All of them.
We've done that in that way, and we have. That is a change, and that's a change that was initiated with the Red Team review process over the last couple of years.
Aren't you concerned that the OBR themselves say that given the delays, the scale of migration required in 2016-17, there's clearly a risk that the eventual profile will differ significantly from the one that you're giving now?
With respect, with respect, the OBR are making a statement of the obvious, which is that there is always risk in every single plan that you put forward. Well, unless you live in a different world than I do, all IT programs always carry an element of risk. All change programs carry an element of risk. We are rolling out 5 separate programs of very similar scale, not exactly, but programs that involve IT, the PIP DLA changes, the CMEC changes, the changes in introduction of the cap. On every one of those, of course, there is risk, but we're rolling them out in exactly the same way, which is we pathfinder them first, then we check with new entrants, and then we start loading those that were on originally. And that process is actually, we find throughout those, with tweaks and with changes, alterations, sometimes a little bit of a delay, sometimes a change. That's the way to do it. And so in a sense, what our Shiplee has recommended is nothing more, I think, than common sense as the right way to do it. But honestly, this is what we believe. You've just heard the SRO say categorically he believes this is doable. But again, as we test, as we evaluate, and then we implement, we will be much clearer as we roll further. In a year's time, when we come back to you, we'll be in a much clearer position to be able to tell you how we're getting on with the next phases of that and be very open about it. There won't be any change to that. But there is always an element of risk in these programs. Can I just say to you that actually, interestingly enough, in the private sector, when they run IT programs, I was looking back at, there's always a sense, by the way, that only that the governments fail on IT. Not exactly the case. The reality is that in many of them, they write off almost 30% to 40% of their IT developments because there are changes inherent with these risks. So in actual fact, what we're doing here isn't separate from that. It's a process that imbibes the same principles, but I believe the process that Shiplee's brought forward is the right one. And the numbers you're extrapolating from a bar graph, I think, are in fact a sense of where that position will be at that time. But we may accelerate it may slightly delay, but that's the real nature of what you're doing.
But what's on page 134 of the OBR's report is an expression of Howard's plan for delivery at the moment. There is risk, as the Secretary of State has said, but as we go through each fiscal event, we'll update those workload forecasts accordingly, as we do for all of our workload forecasts.
Can you just remind us how many times this has been revised?
I don't know how many times it's been revised.
Well, we had an initial plan, which was announced out in 2011, and to the best of my memory, this is the next look at how it's revised. So there's one. We always said that the original plan was indicative, it's our best estimates. We've learned a lot, and this is now the plan at the end of that process.
But you've also always said how confident you are. Every time we have raised with you the difficulties of introducing this system and potential risks, the answer has come back from the department, from the Secretary of State, from you, essentially that everything is A-OK. How many times has this system had to be changed?
Well, this is it. This is the programme that Shiplee has brought forward.
You told us in September it was on time, on budget. Yeah. It's now being changed. It's been changed before that.
I was referring to the 2017 date, which I was quite clear about, that in essence it will be delivered by 2017. This is what Shiplee is saying. With the one exception, for reasons that I think I've made obvious, in essence that was the plan delivers. The different way we're delivering it is instead of loading those numbers up front, we want to ensure by testing, evaluation and then implementing that actually the systems work for the complex groups before we then start rolling the numbers into. I think that is nothing more than common sense. And I think this is the point about the SRO.
Why didn't you think that before?
I did.
Okay,
well, you clearly didn't.
You can understand why there's a degree of scepticism, Secretary of State, because a year ago you said in a year's time you would have a much clearer idea of the detailed rollout. It's now a year on, and you're saying in another year you'll have a better idea.
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm not. What I'm saying is here we have a plan which the SRO, Howard Shiplee, who's come in from the private sector to do, has actually worked through. We have a new specialist IT individuals come in again from the private sector who is signed off on this process. As far as they're concerned, this is the plan that's been given to me. I adopt that. That plan is the one that's in front of you. We already, and it's worth reminding ourselves, we already have the Pathfinder. We will build on that Pathfinder. And the way that we're doing it does address that single biggest problem, which is that we have to learn from past mistakes. And the past mistakes on this are highlighted by what happened under tax credits in the last government when it crashed and lots of people were damaged by that.
But there's slowdown and there's a snail's pace, and this is much more than any anticipated. Perhaps you can answer some questions, specific questions about timescales and that Stephen's got.
A technical question, which is important, and I know a lot of people will be interested. When do you anticipate the tax credits, housing benefits and ESA will be brought into UC? When's your broad timetable? So tax credits, housing benefit, ESA.
Well, we'll start some of those in the northwest clearly, and then if you're talking about tax credits, 2016, we're in discussion with HMRC at the moment as to what an appropriate timing would be, and just what it would look like in terms of the most effective way to start transiting tax credits in.
Lord Freud, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I mean, clearly we will have samples of all those people in quite reasonable scale as we go into the northwest, as we go into a full region. Tax credits, ESA, vulnerable people, people with complicated housing situations, and so on. And what we're doing is a major exercise of testing and learning from what we do in that period right the way through next year, and that is looking at three areas. The first is, how does UC policy actually work in practice? And you find already we have learned an enormous amount from just the Pathfinder and all the things we've had to change to make the Pathfinder work. We need to look at what actually happens in labour market terms as a result of the introduction of UC and test some of that rather thoroughly. And thirdly, we need to do an elaborate exercise to get the local support services working, particularly for the vulnerable claimants. And that is a collaborative exercise to set up a series of partnerships in a way that the people are getting the financial inclusion support, the digital inclusion support, and the much more holistic support from the districts than we've seen in the past. So there's a real change in how we are going to be producing those services from today, when usually those services have been produced on a service line basis, not on a supporting the person as an individual, which is what we're hoping to achieve with the local support.
And if you take something like housing benefit, which is while you were voting, the Secretary of State, my colleague, Teresa, we're just covering that off. It's because of the changes, obviously local authorities of all the different persuasions are clearly anxious, but recognising they're having to wind down their housing benefit offices, of course, because that's going to be wrapped into UC. But picking up on my colleague's question that 700,000 or so, the people in the support group, what have you, are going to be coming in later. Clearly, housing benefit is going to be really, really important. The Secretary of State recognised that, obviously, and said, yes, there's going to be a budget allocated. That's a really important point in the sense that what I would be very concerned about would be, as we got closer, if the government were to say, no, we will pass that back to the local authority and you find the discretionary budget to provide that. It's really, really important for local authorities across the UK, so England and Wales, that they can be confident from their housing benefit side in the longer term, that money will be there separately from the local authority budget. I just want absolute clarification on that.
I mean, we will be having a detailed, longer-term migration to discuss with local authorities, because it's quite clear they do need to know how to handle their housing benefit departments. And clearly, one of the things we're testing with the local support service framework is how will that work in real detail? Because as you move from the service lines that we see at the moment, administer housing benefit, to the kind of support for people who really find it very difficult, for instance, to manage on direct payments, you're looking at a much more rounded service for those individuals to support them. And to the extent to which local authorities and housing associations are part of that picture of support, that is exactly what we need to get really well tested through in the next period, so that as we get volumes of those more vulnerable people, we know exactly how to look after them best.
And finance whatever that service may be, because the point I'm getting at is for austerity reasons, which I understand, local authorities have obviously had their budgets, cut and restricted for reasons that we all understand. I just want to be really clear as we go into that particular process that you're discussing there, that if necessary, the budget or the money will be provided by the DWP and not expect local authorities.
We have got a budget line on that, and Mike, you ought to just kind of take us through it.
We'll pick up local authority costs under the new burdens regime. If the department is causing local authorities to expend money, we would pick up
or to retain its housing benefit.
We would have to do that through a blend of resetting the business case or resetting our own budgets in order to support that.
I'm going to move on, and Graham's got the next set of questions.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. The Job Centre Pluses in my area, I keep in touch on a regular basis, and I have to say the staff that I meet are very enthusiastic about universal credit, and they were just telling me last week that they are really quite impatient for them to get their teeth into this. In addition to the claimant commitment, it's changing the culture, and they're keen to help their clients into work on a permanent basis. But I've got a couple of questions on the IT, because when we went into Greater Manchester to look at some of the pilot schemes, they appeared to be working well, but there is concern that the Pathfinders will not be able to accommodate the 1.9 million changes in the circumstances on a monthly basis. And I wondered perhaps, Howard, if you could just...
what you're talking about is the total number of changes when the system is totally operational nationally, as I understand it. So it would be unreasonable at this stage of the development to be able to say that would be the case, but that is the objective, ultimately, that the digital solution will ultimately address. And I see no reason why that won't be the case.
Okay, so you're confident that the system is robust enough to be able to take those volumes once it's...
Well, it has to be, because that's how the business case is predicated.
Okay, but since we embarked on this project, smartphones and the technology that has come out has changed a lot of working lives, and indeed the Job Centre staff were keen for the apps to be on their phones, because a lot of their clients are on those. So is it possible, the work that you're doing now, to seamlessly go into an online app on smartphones?
About 85% of claimants currently are using those types of devices. They are not using conventional computers in their homes. But I think one's also got to bear in mind that the claimant group we're talking about would be much more conversant with those sort of devices.
Yes.
So I think there is an issue going forward as to whether it's very easy to jump to conclusions and make the assumption that everyone will therefore use their mobile phone. I don't think one should jump to conclusions. I was in a job centre last week, sitting in on a claimant interview, and a 50-year-old who was not computer literate And one of the powerful things I thought about that was that through the Digital Job Centre initiative, with the 6,000 terminals being rolled out across the country, he was immediately offered within a matter of days to come in and spend a number of hours whilst he would be helped to understand how to use a computer, how to get online, and that's quite helpful, not just because it's a means for him to access universal credit, but because there are opportunities to buy things online sometimes which are cheaper than one would buy in the normal course of events. So I think one's got to be very careful. One doesn't make the assumption everyone's going to be using those devices, because I think there will be people who will not be capable. So I think there's a balance. But the point you make also reinforces a previous point, which is that technology is moving on all the time as well, and very quickly.
If I may, Chairman, just on that point, I accept totally that not everybody's going to be on smartphones, and a 50-year-old is a good example. As a 50-year-old, in my constituency, the local authority works very closely with Job Centre Plus, and we have something called the Work Zone, which accommodates exactly that sort of age group to help them apply for jobs. And having a wonderful example of a Waitrose store that opened in the constituency enabled exactly that sort of age group to apply successfully in many cases for those outstanding jobs. But have you analysed the growth of the smartphone and the groups that will be using that in the next few years between now and 2016-17?
David, you want to?
Yeah, well, I mean, the standard figures that the Government Digital Service are now working on is that the use generally has gone up to 30% of access on the internet is now through smartphones, and it is growing like that, which is the reason that we are now designing the enhanced solution, the digital solution, for a smartphone. I mean, that is the design base. And there's the secondary issue there is about the inclusion agenda, the digital inclusion agenda, the people, the 50-year-olds. And we are putting a lot of effort into that, not just in the local authority pilots, but in the digital deal, which we're supporting. And again, there are a lot of very interesting developments that are being trialled through. I think one of the most fascinating, I went to one a couple of weeks ago at Queen's Park, where A2 Dominion is trialling a system whereby they get youngsters, students, to the cut-off age is 45, so older people 45 plus are paired up with students and get that help onto the internet. So all of those areas with tenant blocks looking to put Wi-Fi in. We're putting Wi-Fi into the job centres now. It's not just internet access devices, it's actually a Wi-Fi process. All of those things now, we're really beginning to get something rolling on digital inclusion.
And two other points very quickly. One is the committee, of course, is come and see the development already that's in existence in Victoria Street. We'll very happily show them that, see how that will easily transfer now into apps and things like that. And the second thing is that we brought Kevin Cunnington in, who is IT expert, who was with Vodafone before, who's really smart on this area, if I possibly use that. And this is part of what he's also doing, which is to drive this on to a new level of ability to be able to transfer to these areas so that people can use it.
Okay. D'Angelo, quickly, and then Sheila.
Thank you. There's an excellent partnership working going on between the London Borough of Havering and Job Centre Plus. I had a letter just today about the reduction in JSA unemployment in East London. This is from the East London District Office, and it reports that in particular in Havering the 18 to 24 JSA claimant count has decreased by 7.8% between September and October this year, with a 29.8 reduction from October 2012 to October 2013, which is very good news. But it is at variance with the department statistics, which report the majority of new claims are from unemployed people aged under 25 in the Pathfinder areas. So how do you interpret that difference in statistics?
I mean, the way we've designed the Pathfinder is to get single people, and almost by definition with relatively straightforward circumstances. And so the bulk of people are in the 18 to 24 group for the Pathfinder. The most interesting thing, point that we are establishing in the Pathfinder in that way is the attraction of universal credit for this group is clearly because it's an in-work and out-of-work benefit. They get the equivalent of tax credits when they're in work, so they get something that they don't do under JSA. So it's a very attractive benefit for people under 25 for that reason. For going into work, it's a huge encouragement for getting them into work.
Okay, Sheila, you have questions?
Sorry. I didn't realise we got as far ahead as that. We seem to I know, my turn, and I'm not ready. I'm not ready. Right.
Look at question 15.
It was question 15, yes, it was indeed. Yeah. We've had two big reports this year, which the National Audit Office and the Public Administration Committee, and I think the Secretary of State certainly has described these as entirely historical. Why do you think the National Audit Office felt the need to be so critical if you were in fact already acting on all of these issues?
Well, because as I said at the time, I fully accepted what they said. I haven't made any effort to change that at all, and I fully accept that. And my only assumption is that the information that we gave them, the reports were mostly based on, first of all, my Red Team report. In fact, there are direct quotes from that as to regards to what could be done. So that was very clear to them. And the second part of it was further work be done to look at, and this is isolated really with universal credit, some issues surrounding control of suppliers and some of the accounts flow. And that was all made available to them as well. So these were issues that I had set the whole process in train back in 2011-12 to look at, because I was concerned specifically about the nature of the way that UC was, particularly to say this had become kind of standalone and isolated within the department, and therefore was not utilising some of the knowledge and strength that existed within the department. So there were elements about that, and that's why their report was critical. But as I said at the time, every one of their recommendations in the NAA report had already been implemented, because they were recommendations hugely taken from those reviews that were already made. So there was very little I felt that was new there, but I fully agreed with what they had laid out in that particular report. So most of that evidence came, I felt, from our internal reports.
So did you accept the description of a fortress mentality?
That came from the Red Team report. That was a direct quote, and I did accept it, yes.
So do you think that officials are now able to be completely frank if there's problems?
Yeah, but they always have been able to be frank. I think what happens sometimes is that if something isn't quite going according to the way you anticipated it, sometimes there's a tendency to say, well, I need to do more work to correct it, and then you do more work and it's not quite right, so you throw a little bit more work, and you don't want to say sometimes that we've got a problem here because you think you're going to be able to resolve it, but sometimes there's a big policy issue locked in there. And I think that's what the Red Team report was referring to, that this stuff, some of the issues and problems around that balance between security and the online ask needed to have been discussed again and again much more than perhaps was the case, and that's where the fortress mentality came from. But in all the other programs, PIP and the others, that has not been the case, and they have, as a result, problems of being flushed right up to the top very early on, so that we can deal with them, we can put whatever resources are necessary behind them.
I just wanted to clarify, the Red Team that's constantly been referred to here, what date did that start its work?
Well, I asked that to go in back in 2011.
And when did it report? I
believe, and I'd have to go, I'm happy to send a note on that one, but I think it went in right at the end of 2011, beginning of 2012.
So, are you saying, therefore, that when the NAO reported earlier this year, it was reporting on something that was nearly 2 years behind?
That we'd already started the reset on, which is why all the recommendations had already been adopted under...
What happened then between early 2012 and 2013?
My memory, I think, is that we had the report in around mid-12.
Yeah, the report actually came to us about July, I think it was, finalised in July, which reported back to me. If that's what you're asking.
And then we made changes through the autumn with Philip Langsdale taking control.
And that's when we introduced the Pathfinder process, for example, which was part of the recommendations made by the...
But there's an elaborate history that actually the report, the NAO report, does go through, so you can see the exact dates. So you don't have to depend on our memories of the exact dates.
So, are you suggesting that the NAO report is of no use to us because it is so out of date?
Quite the contrary. No. All I was referring to was it is a historic report because we had realised, because of that red team process and the Price Waterhouse process, which we then initiated, already we had been aware there was a problem, which is why I put the team in. And their report directed me to where that problem was. Philip Langsdale, highly experienced, brilliant IT man, but also experienced programme manager, had delivered Terminal 2 at Heathrow, for example. He immediately, when he came in, took that and said, I know what we have to do to make the changes, and we'll do null work next year, which is what Howard Shiplee has done. To do the rest of the rollout, we'll need to look at that as to the way we change it. And that was what was set, except that he died in December, and I had to spend 2 to 3 months finding a replacement for him. In the meantime, we then were working with David Pitchford from the Cabinet Office, from the programme side, from the MPA. And what he was doing was saying, well, then alongside that, we need to look at a new digital process and see how that can bed in. And so we did a proof of concept on that while the team and Howard Shiplee were looking at whether we can roll this out in a better way as well at the same time.
I mean, do you feel that should have been made more public, even at times when you were, for example, coming to this committee? Because I don't think it was as obvious as it's now being suggested, as it should have been, that many of these issues are already being tackled as early as 2012, when, what you're saying just today.
I accept the observation. I mean, maybe we should have been a little bit more obvious about it, but I was bound on setting to go and get this sorted out in response to the committee report. Not the committee, but the report, the team.
We gave a very clear picture of what was happening to this committee. In July, we were talking about...
In July?
In July this year, yeah.
In July this year. But what you're actually telling this committee is that you're already working on that long before the NAO reported, and therefore had discovered these problems, which is a long time before July.
It was, and my view was we had a responsibility to ensure that we reset this and got it right. I mean, it's always been my impression that we would turn to the committee to be able to explain what we're doing and why, which is what I believe we did do. To be fair, the sad death of Philip threw a few months out on that programme because he already had a plan which we then had to review, and that's where Howard Shiplee came in.
So any of the recommendations that the NAO made that are proving challenging?
Well, the recommendations that they made are the ones that we have fundamentally agreed with and have implemented pretty much all of them.
Challenging?
Well, everything's challenging at the end of the day. I mean, this is, a complex
you're already
program.
Implementing them.
Implementing them is not the same as saying them challenging. The whole reset program is, of course, like anything else, a challenging process, which is, why, in the case of Howard, I went out to find somebody from outside, like Philip Langsdale, who had the experience of these complex programs and delivering them. That's the key. That's why I went outside. So that was part of the recommendation, really.
A few queries, if I may, Minister. It doesn't quite tally with the NAO report in terms of what you're saying. They're saying that the NAO was asked to come in February by the Major Projects Authority because they didn't have confidence. So even though you said that you...
February of 2013. That's right.
But you're saying that at the end of 2012, you were starting to get things under wraps, but they weren't convinced. They said they had serious concerns. They had no detailed blueprint and transition plan for universal credit. So that was 2013.
That was the recommendations that we were trying to address at the time. When the MPA came in...
They didn't have any confidence
in you. Well, let me just finish this answer. The MPA came in. I specifically asked at the time for David Pitchford from the MPA to come and take charge of the programme because of the death of Philip Langsdale, and it was in that interregnum that I said that we needed somebody else to come in whilst we searched for the other person, and the MPA report was linked to that request, and that's what I asked him to do. So, at that stage, the MPA would normally come in anyway at the beginning of the year. But as they came in, I asked the Cabinet Office Minister, I said, I do need somebody to be able to help reset this programme and complete that process of a new blueprint, which is exactly what they did. Well, that's what happened. So,
but before he so tragically died, had he alerted you to problems in the system?
Yeah, the whole point was, the Red Team report, first of all, was the process of alerting us to what I had been concerned about back in 2011. I had concerned that what we were asking, what the original plan was, whether it was deliverable in quite the frame that it was, and whether they were dealing with some of the issues and problems that were arising. And I come back to the point, the difficulty being between the online solution and the, let's come back to that in a second, the online solution and the security element. So this is a very important area, because this is the first time that a government will be doing and putting such a lot accessible online. So security was a very big issue at that stage, and I think they got bogged down on that, which is why I then asked the Red Team report to look at it. They came back with recommendations about what to do. Philip Langsdale then took that report, did more work on the programme, and he was the one that made the decision and said, look, we need to start the Pathfinder. So the reset had begun with the Pathfinder decision, and then he said the next phase is to look at the equipment in detail and figure out how then we can roll out using the equipment as it is and whatever that we don't need to use in essence, which is what Shiplee's been doing since March. So that, however, in the meantime, was taken forward by David Pitchford, but he was looking specifically at that stage also at the digital solution, which was a new idea brought to us at that time by the...
Can I just follow that on then, in terms of one of the key issues that they found was around ineffective departmental oversight, as we've just heard, so that the governance arrangements within the department were seen to be ineffective. Would you say that that has been resolved now?
Yes, I believe it has. I mean, it's something that you might want to have Howard on. But if I can just clarify one point on this, it's just a note given to me, and it's true because I was trying to remember the date. The MPA back in November 2012 acknowledged that Philip Langsdale was absolutely on the right track in what he was doing, and that so the reset that I'm talking about ended up being looked at by the NAO was critical. Mike, on the internal structures.
Yeah, one of the things that we were challenged on by the NAO, and then at the Public Accounts Committee, and we shared a report with the Public Accounts Committee that we asked for from PwC, looking at financial, IT, commercial and programme controls. We acknowledged at the time that some of those controls and some of that governance wasn't working as effectively as it should.
Totally ineffective, it says here.
Okay. We've been working through those processes. So if you take commercial controls, for example, we now have a dedicated commercial director and team supporting Howard and the programme board. We've insourced some of the work that had previously been outsourced to our IT suppliers to make sure that we're effectively defining everything that we're requesting. We've strengthened our three-line of defence model to ensure that at every level of the organisation and outside of the organisation we have the controls in place. We've reflected on the collective and personal responsibilities, for example, of everyone at the Universal Credit Board. So as the Finance Director General, I'm responsible for not only supporting Howard in the delivery of Universal Credit, but also challenging him and the rest of the board if I don't believe that the control environment is working as effectively as it should. Now, if this has been audited recently and the audit is showing improvement, there is still more that we need to do, but we're applying the lessons that we're learning on a constant basis, and not only in Universal Credit, but also applying that learning across the whole department where we think there are weaknesses in other areas too.
You mentioned there's still a lot to do.
More to do, I think.
More to do. Apologies. In terms of the governance and the importance around risk assessment and so on is a cultural issue. Cultural issues down to leadership. Has that been addressed?
Yes.
I was going to say that, but I think it's for Howard to determine as the SRO whether he feels that the governance of the programme is better.
Forgive me for the short answer.
We're quite happy with short answers.
Okay, thank you. Just to add that we also, in terms of governance, the chairman of the programme board is now completely independent. He's from outside the department, although he has worked in government and in ministries. So that has reinforced the independence of that board in terms of governance. In terms of risk, one of the issues I think raised in some of the reports was the need for risk assessments, and we are working our way through that at the moment, the whole issue of how to manage risk and, more importantly, how to identify it in terms of top-down and bottom-up type of risks. I think very importantly for me, we also have an arrangement now where I meet with a number of DG colleagues outside the board on a weekly basis. So the point of universal credit may have been seen to be slightly outside the department in a previous life. It's now very much at the very centre of the department's activity. And I'm finding a lot of support and help from the permanent secretary in that regard as well.
Can I just ask you then, as part of that, the whistleblowing procedures are very important. It does allow risk that hasn't been identified to be flagged up. That does seem to have been missed, or certainly when, as I mentioned before, the JCP advisor was absolutely told to go away. So what are you doing in terms of whistleblowing policies to ensure that risk from those sources can be identified?
Well, I think the question was answered to some extent before. I've had no indications of anyone whistleblowing in the operation at this time that has come to my attention. Please rest assured, if they do, then they will get a fair hearing.
I will put them in contact with you, because obviously it hasn't been.
I'm happy to do if you've got anything like that.
I know it has been, and he's got evidence to show that it has been in contact, but obviously something's happened.
Well, a genuine has not got to me. And
we'd want to see it. I mean, if someone's got evidence about what we're doing, we want to see it.
For you.
Thank you.
Okay,
happy to take it.
I think we're on to a question about leadership, which is actually some of the questions on the IT capacity from Brenda. But I think some of them have possibly been asked.
So we might go on to the agile.
Yes.
Which is, or do you want me to?
No, that's Teresa's. No,
oh, right,
it's
okay. It's the costs then, essentially. Yeah. 34 million in IT costs will have to be written off. But what's the final write-off figure?
I think we've kind of answered that.
We've actually impaired 40.1 million. So the 34 million.
Sorry, I don't understand what you mean by impaired when it comes to money. What does that mean? Down the drain, one of my colleagues said. Impaired. Is it put in a box and only called on when something desperate happens, or what?
Well, impairment is an accounting term.
Yeah, well, I don't understand it.
Which means that we could use. Yeah, what we have said is that there's no use for the code that has been written, and on that basis, it has no
value. The code
value.
Being part of the UC.
Yeah, exactly. So in financial terms, you've got two different types of assets that you can build. You can have a tangible asset, so that's something like this, or you can have an intangible asset, which is basically the IT code that's built to run on the computer systems. What we have is £40.1 million of code that was built that has no use within the system. So rather than keep it as an asset, we identify that as something that we're impairing or writing off because it has no future value. It's not going to generate an economic return for the department. And that's something that is standard in pretty much any organisation.
How was...
Stop you.
Yes.
It was question 16 you were meant to be asking.
Oh, sorry, I thought I was saying 17. Well, can I just ask this question?
Just finish that, and then I'm going to go to Teresa.
I'm really intrigued to know how you could spend 40 million on a code for a programme which you now decide you're not ever going to use.
Because one of the things that happens, and Howard may want to add to this, as we develop solutions, sometimes you have to work and rework elements of software development. This is something that happens pretty much across the industry. There's been research in the USA from Foresters, for example, that shows that in terms of the reworking of code, it's fairly normal to have to rework about 30% of that code. The other colleagues in the US have identified the potential for 40% rework. So in that sort of range, what we're doing, I don't believe, is unusual in a project of this size.
But were these external contracts, or were these codes being devised by people within?
Maybe I need to explain this
because if
just explain
it's 40% is a write-offs, whoever's negotiating the contract is an idiot.
No, we're not saying 40% is being written off in this.
Well, that's
far
what
from
he
it.
said.
No, he said the general industry view is that because when you're dealing with software and you're writing coded solutions for issues and policy problems, it's not an exact science in the sense that you try and resolve something through a series of code changes and you go down the road and then it doesn't completely resolve the issue. In other words, what you were trying to do becomes a dead end. It doesn't actually work. The way you have to go back to square one and say, okay, we're going to have to look at another way to do that. So there's a lot of man-hours work go into resolving something which sometimes just simply doesn't come to the conclusion you were hoping that when you set out on it. By the way, that's gone on long before IT was around. In building all sorts of things, people reach a point where this process doesn't work. So this is just simply costing that area, therefore, because it's not going to be used, because it didn't work quite the way that they're anticipating, therefore that will be written off because it's not usable on this program. And then you come back and say, well, there's another way, we have to try that other way to do it. Science is littered with this, industry is littered with this. This is the nature of just simply sometimes some solutions in areas don't quite work as you had anticipated. You have to rethink that process.
But I can remember,
yes,
Secretary...
Glenn, can I just stop you because we're getting bogged down in some of this and Teresa's questions on the overall implementation costs with the delay. So I'm going to go to Teresa. I might come back to you if we've got time. But Teresa.
Thank you. Mr. Driver, you mentioned earlier about the 40 million being written off, and you mentioned the 91 million that's going to be written down over 5 years. So does that not mean that 130 million will be written off by the time the policy is actually implemented?
Well, there is a difference between those two amounts, because the 40 million pounds, which is written, the 40 million isn't usable. The remaining 90 million will be written down over a 5-year period, but through that period we will also gain a benefit from using that as well.
Okay, so that's the software cost. But we've heard mention about new appointments, reports written by PwC. Where in the accounts will those costs be? They won't be in the software writing cost, will they?
No, the work that we've used, if you take PwC as an example, that will be within our administration costs, because PwC are our audit partner, so we brought them in as our external audit partner.
So when we're looking at the costs of this universal credit, there are costs other than the software costs. Will we be able to identify those in the accounts?
Yes.
Right, okay, because you can understand that this session is meant to be DWP accounts, universal credit and statistics, but we don't have the accounts.
Well, I think you're having a session with us on the 3rd of February on the accounts in detail.
But then the accounts will nearly be ready for the next set of accounts.
Well, we'll have
31st of March, I think, is your year end, isn't it?
Yeah, we would in most instances like to lay our accounts before the summer recess each year.
So as the finance man, can you tell us why the accounts are so late?
Because we had an issue with the impairment of universal credit, which we've been talking about, and
so
it was an issue. There was an issue of significant, we believe, public interest in getting that right before we published our accounts.
Okay.
But when we sat with the Public Accounts Committee in September, we had identified that we felt that the impairment was going to be £34.4 million, and beyond that we felt there was some uncertainty about the accounts, and we might have to impair something like an additional £12.5 million.
Right, so this figure that we're talking about the write-off, that's as at the end of March 2013?
It is.
And is there a further write-off from then to now?
No.
So your management accounts show no further...
Our management accounts will show an impairment of £40.1 million for universal credit. We've not written down or amortised our asset beyond that, because it only went into live running on the 29th of April. So in our accounts for 2013-14, we will show how much of that asset is written down in those accounts.
as you would with any capital programme.
Thank you. And the accounts will be published tomorrow?
They will. They'll be laid with Parliament tomorrow.
Okay.
So both the Permanent Secretary and the CNAG have signed the accounts.
And Minister, there's been a lot of debate about the timetable for universal credit. There's been concern that maybe it was going too fast, then it was going too slow. Have at any time you issued a ministerial direction to the department?
On what?
On the timetabling.
I've actually issued no ministerial directions to the department on anything, but certainly not on timings.
Has the Permanent Secretary, did some Permanent Secretary ever request a ministerial direction?
No.
So there'll be no ministerial directions published along with the accounts tomorrow?
None whatsoever. And actually, the PAC hearing, it was made quite clear that ministers were completely sanguine about timings on this. We'd never made it the original proposals put forward, laid out. We agreed with, but at no stage have we ever sought to accelerate or change those timings arbitrarily at any stage.
It would be an accounting requirement for us to declare any directions, and there are none. There are none.
There are none.
Waited so long for these accounts. I just wondered if
Don't worry.
get any
Just
more
want to clarify
surprises.
that. No surprises. Nothing like that.
Mr. Shiplee, you're in charge now, as I see it. The IT project, there are two different types of IT project. There's Agile and Waterfall. Could you explain the difference?
Yeah, I thought I'd done that before, but certainly Waterfall, as I said, is something where you start off with a very clear specification. You actually write down exactly what you want, what you believe is going to work, and then you develop it, and then you test it. The Agile system for the software development is different, and what it says is that you learn as you go, you make mistakes as you go, and you do it all in a very iterative process.
So this project is an Agile project?
The work that we're doing now in terms of the digital part of the work is very much Agile.
Only that part of the work?
Yes.
Okay. One of the criticisms of government departments and local authorities as well is that they find it hard to be an intelligent client because often the people you're buying IT from or selling you solutions are more savvy than maybe the civil servants. Do you think that the DWP is now an intelligent client?
Yes, I do. First of all, because in terms of the digital work, we are actually doing that in-house. I'm very grateful to Government Digital Services, who came in after the David Pitchford reviews and commenced the process of the digital design processes. The plan there was that we would ultimately, as a department, we would take that over. They helped to get us started, and that is now happening. We're shortly with the arrival of our DG for digital change. He's now taking a very clear lead in that work, and we are actively now bringing in our own people, and our own people will now start to replace the GDS people. So we're actually doing it ourselves, which I think is exactly the right thing to do, because of the way the iterative process works, testing it on claimants in small numbers, in focus groups, and that has proved to be very effective in terms of the proof of concept. Everyone who's seen the proof of concept, and I think your committee has seen some of it, have agreed that this looks like the way to go. Of course, the proof of concept is the start. There's a lot more work to do thereafter.
A question I think you may have answered earlier on, but just to clarify for me, is that the new migration timetable has not yet been subjected to a full business review.
The business case is due for presentation to the HMT in the early part of next year.
Next year?
Yes.
Do you know when?
From memory, March. If I'm right, Mike, you might be able to help me.
So
it's earlier than that.
It's earlier than that, I think.
I think we had some discussions with the Treasury about trying to share the business case with them before Christmas. But I'm not sure about whether January is the case. But we're talking about very shortly.
Yeah, January, February.
Okay. Minister, you mentioned before, when I mentioned about housing benefit and local authorities, and you said you're in discussion. Who are you in discussion with?
Well, this is the first time that the process has been announced. Mm-hmm. So the first thing that Lord Freud mentioned again is that we are constantly in discussion right now with local authorities about new asks, and this is simply going to be part of that process. But as I made the undertaking at the time, and I discussed this previously here, not here in the committee, but with my team, that if there is a group of people that don't enter into the UC realm at the same time as by the deadline of the others, then whatever requirements are regarded of local government, we will actually sort out and help them assist them with financially.
Okay. Does the department now have a single departmental plan?
For universal credit?
Yes.
Yes.
And who's in charge of that?
SRO.
Right. Good luck. No.
It might just be useful just to go back on the local authorities. I meet with the local authorities and the devolved nations every month now, and have been doing so for the last nearly 5 months.
And local authorities are represented on the UC programme.
Yes,
they are, yeah.
It's just that there has been a lot of concern with local authorities because when there is any slippage, they're trying to plan ahead for budgets, and it's a problem for them.
We've picked that up a lot.
Particularly ones that have actually outsourced contracts with other suppliers for housing benefit, and they're in
We're dealing with that right now through him.
Okay. There was just one last thing, and that was that. I'll find this stat here.
Do you want us to come back?
No, it's all right. It's all right. I'll leave it because I think actually Sheila asked it earlier on.
Okay.
Just the one last thing is the Permanent Secretary told the Public Accounts Committee that the DWP had implemented many successful IT projects in the past. So what was the difference between? I'm not saying it isn't successful, but I'm saying it's turned out differently than you expected, hence the write-off. But what was the difference between this one to other projects? Was it personnel? Was it the change of senior people in the department? Is there a single reason, or is it multiple?
Well, there's lots of issues around this. I think Shiplee made a point earlier on when he was describing the difference between waterfall and agile. At the early stages of this process, this was described by the team as going to be an agile process. In actual fact, the more we proceeded down that road, hence my concerns about it in 2011, the more it began to look like a kind of hybrid. So it was both agile. As agile as you know, describe to you what you do is you cut up the program development into standalone sections. There are short bursts of work that take place. You complete a process, it's standalone and ready to work. Then you move on to the next level. With Waterfall, you're working on everything all the way through till you reach the end point. This had become a little bit of both by the latter stages. And so I think what was different about this was the nature of just trying to bring these benefits together and also do an online ask. And as Shiplee said, perhaps over-elaboration in terms of the digital by default message that was going in. And the key thing is to simplify and tidy that up so that we're clear about what they're accessing and how they're accessing it. Because what then led to problems was the complexity of the security got worse and worse for that very simple reason, and that was the concern that we had. So the difference really, I don't think it was a difference in terms of intent from the department, but I think there was a concern about, well, I'll just finish this off. Yeah. I think there was a concern about the nature of the overall vision about how that was going to take place at the practical level in terms of those administering it.
It's worth just going on what the Secretary of State made that point. The difference between this universal credit and other programs is that other programs have been rather narrow and focused on delivering one thing or one payment stream. The universal credit is a combination, and there's a great deal of complexity in how different elements of them interact, and that is where it's difficult. We're actually taking what was 1,000 pages of regulations in the old system, boiling them down to 300 pages of regulation in practice under UC, and then trying to deliver that in one program. And that is something which in organisational terms is quite tough to do.
It's also, I think, worth saying that there have been some aspects of universal credit that have been very successful.
Yeah.
So during some phases of the programme there was quite a bit of anxiety about the way in which the real-time information links would occur between HMLC data and the universal credit system. And RTI has been a particularly successful part of the programme to such an extent that we're also looking to learn about how we can apply RTI into other parts of our business ahead of universal credit going live.
This is a release, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to do this, but this was a release from RTI, just in case you hadn't seen it. There comes from, I think, some astonishing figures about how many people are now on the system ahead of where we anticipated. So that bit of it, plus the feed across to universal credit, has been a remarkable success, so much so that we're keen to accelerate that process.
Okay, just one last question. Mr. Driver, we talked about the 40 million write-off and the 91 million write-down, and that's 40 million of software that's not going to be usable, 91 million of software that will be usable but will be written down over 5 years, did you say? But that's not the total cost, is it? What's the cost of universal credit?
Well, in 2000 up to the end of March 2013, we spent £425 million on universal credit. 17 million of that was with HMRC and 408 million was with the DWP. Of the money that we spent, we invested 398 and we used 10 million for live running of the systems themselves. Most of what we spent was on IT, in actual fact IT development. Of that 303 million pounds, of that 303 million, 196 million was capitalised under international accounting standards to form the asset, some of which we're now impairing. But we also spent money on, for example, people, so the project teams, all of the issues that are associated with a project of this scale.
Just last question. So on the cost of the software writing, which was done by external companies, was there anything in the contracts with them where there was any clawback if the software didn't deliver what you asked? Or have you taken the full hit?
It isn't normal in contracts to...
It's normal to have penalty clauses.
It is normal to have penalty clauses for failure to deliver. I think importantly here, Howard may want to say something too. Yeah. The quality, we had 2 reviews looking at the quality of what had been produced, because it's important to us to make sure that we're getting what we paid for in actual fact. And what those reviews showed is that the quality of what had been built was of a high standard and had utility. I don't know if you want to say more.
No, you probably want to know, because you did the review.
Exactly that. I think, first of all, it would be very difficult with it. I can understand at the time why you talk about clawback clauses. I think with development work of this type at this scale, I think you would find it very difficult in the marketplace to find anyone who would do this work at total risk. That would be my view. And therefore the department picked up that risk as part of the contracting strategy.
So what you're saying is what was developed for you was actually of high quality and fit for the specification that had been set, but the specification changed and then it wasn't usable.
Things may have changed.
I'll come back to that point that I made earlier. It's my explanation.
Some of what we originally specified around security.
Security would be one of the big areas where what was being tried to be done simply wasn't realistic.
We've got some more questions on the contract, so from Nigel. So we are almost on. Well, I think we're on the home track. You'll be pleased to know.
I'm trying not to cross my legs too much in the streets.
I think we've probably done most of this area, but I guess the real question is, do you think you were working with the right IT suppliers, or do you think, on reflection, you perhaps should have picked somebody different?
We have been working with a number of large suppliers who've worked with the department for a long time. This isn't the first work they've done. They've proven over the years to have done a great deal of work. It's been very effectively deployed. When I first started, one of the questions I asked was not a dissimilar one. That's why I set up the reviews to look at the utility and the quality of what had been produced. And the reports came back, as has already been stated here, that the quality of the code that had been written was of good quality. It had been well engineered, and we've also had colleagues in Government Digital Services also look at the coding as well. So I think one's also got to be realistic that we haven't mentioned scale, but to be able to get systems analysts and the sort of technical people needed, it would be, in my view, very difficult to find at that time very smaller suppliers. There were a number of very large suppliers, and they had the people with the capacity and the capability to do the work at that time.
And you think the contracts you've got with these suppliers are still appropriate? You've not wish you could change them or do something different?
I mean, contracts there's no perfect contract. I think one of the issues that we're looking at and are in discussion now, because obviously we're using the same contractors to do the further work on the development of the thus far on Pathfinder, and what we're looking at the moment is we're doing some early different definition work, which we're doing on the same contract on a time and material basis, while we all agree exactly what it is we want them to do. And I believe that once we have established that in the early new year, we will move to either a fixed price or a target cost arrangement, which gives us a potential to transfer a reasonable amount of risk onto the suppliers.
And what we are doing is we're looking at the resource deployment of those suppliers on a weekly basis to ensure that we've got consistency with deployment from them with what we think is reasonable. And we've also introduced quarterly independent IT assurance for Howard and for the Chief Information Officer within the department to look at the quality of build too.
Is that the IT advisory board?
Well, it's not an IT advisory board, but it's we brought in independent assurance mechanisms.
And how do you get independent and assurance? Presumably you need some kind of experts, but aren't people you're already employing to do something else?
Yeah, well, we've recently, and we had this when we were looking at child maintenance reform. We brought in Atkins, in actual fact, to do some reviews of the quality and the benchmarking of products that were being built for us, to make sure that we get that not just internal assurance, but also that external assurance.
Okay. So I was going to say one other thing too. Just so that we're not unclear about this, there's a tendency to look at the kind of digital system and then the more legacy system that we're talking about rolling out as completely separate. They're not at all, because of course even the digital system will require strong and important elements of the legacy, that is already being built for the present legacy system. So there is interoperability even by the time they come together. So what work on one is also work that will be done relevant to the other at the same time.
Obviously, there must be some implications for the overall budget, the 2.4 billion overall budget to bring in universal credit, with the fact that things are coming on stream much more slowly, and some are having to be done administratively rather than electronically or digitally. Is there implications for the other big part of the budget we haven't talked about, because you don't have the volumes yet, and that's transitional protection, because that was included originally in the 2.4 billion figure. Will the transitional protection still be there? Will it still be at the same level? But there must be somewhere, if you're going to keep the overall spending envelope for the budget, there must be somewhere where the extra money that must be costing for bits that you didn't expect is coming from.
Well, transitional protection remains in place and remains part of the budget and set against the new roller.
Can you say how much of that, the 2.4 billion, is likely to be that used?
I can't remember, Mike, do you have a figure on that or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, that's a good point, actually. It's a reminder, because I see what's happening. The amount over 2 billion is set, but that's, of course, the cost of implementation. Of course, a lot of the transitional protection is in the annual managed expenditure, not in the departmental.
But there must be implications, because you would have expected a number of those people to have transferred into UC, but they won't have now.
That's right,
until
yes.
maybe anything up to 2 years later.
Well, that means the earlier costs are therefore lower, thus the savings, but then those mount up later in the system as you migrate more. But the allowance is in the system for that transitional protection. We're not getting rid of any of the transitional protection. So as people fall eligible for transitional protection, they will receive it.
So in the OBR's report, on page 135, it shows some of the key changes in the way in which costings will adjust over time. So what that is showing is that over the period from 2013-14 to 2017-18, well, there was also a column for 18-19, but I'll leave that for a moment, the overall costs are 700 million lower over that period.
But one of the reasons you got it past Treasury was the whole point was that universal credit would ultimately be much cheaper to run for government and would reduce the benefits bill. But as you've slowed it down so much, then those savings won't come until a much longer or a lot more years into the future than you were originally anticipating. That must have implications.
Well, I think that's an issue. I do think that's an issue for the business case, though, because that's what we'll revise. Because as the National Audit Office reminded everybody in their report, at the time that it was written, the business case delivers 38 billion pounds of broader benefits. So one of the things that we'll be doing with the business case is reflecting on the adjustments that we're making, and over time seeing what happens to that net present value.
Okay, I think they've probably exhausted you, if not ourselves. I'm not quite sure when Mr. Shiplee says that he's enjoyed himself today. I didn't know if that was meant to be tongue-in-cheek, but if he has, we haven't done our job properly. Our job is obviously to put you under some pressure. So can I thank you very much for coming along this afternoon and for giving us your time. I will see you again on the 3rd of February about the other aspects of the annual report. So thanks very much. Order, order.